Good morning, everybody. I had a rude awakening this morning. All that noise you hear outside while they're shifting the scaffolding from one building to the next because they're redoing the facade and doing plaster. Now it's going to be the building that's directly in front of me, where I had set up my little garden and my little trees and everything. I had made I don't know, some of you may have seen some of the videos and pictures of my little labor of love, which I believe I share with others. I water, I take care of all the plants up and down the street, and I see people that come to festivals and take pictures of my pots, basically, and um, and so I feel I'm doing a service in a roundabout way for the community as well, without anybody asking me, of course. So I just had a little experience, it, as so many things do in life, it taught me to finally finish understanding a subject that we are all involved and concerned with, especially in the United States. Lately, it seems to get rehashed and it resurfaces all the time in different forms. Um, and the subject is prejudices and racism, basically racism that we associate with with racial aspect, physical appearance. But in reality, racism is we attempt to use racism to discriminate other many groups, right? So it's kind of a not well defined problem area that we have in society. But in any case, something just happened to me that really made me understand it finally. And I have two experiences that I bring together that help me sort of verify what my conclusion, what I finish understanding. Boy, I hope you can hear me over all that noise. Um, Briefly, in Hawaii almost five, a little over 4 years ago. Part of the reason I left is because I had a really ugly experience with locals, the Hawaiian locals that live behind our property. We're all very far from each other in that part of Kalapana, but we'd see each other as they drive by in their pickups and stuff. And I'm not going to dwell on this, but basically they beat me up really badly. I mean, I wasn't like no broken bones or severe lacerations or anything. I was bludgeoned, I had like scrapes and stuff. One guy grabbed me and took me down and started pummeling me with fists on the gravel. And anyways, and to me it was always very traumatic because my way of falling in love with Hawaii was always like this bubbly Californian trying to be friendly, and it made no sense that why this hate. Of course, if you lived in Hawaii, you know what's going on between the locals and how they feel and there's this whole fake facade going on between people that don't speak with a pidgin accent and look white. They're seen as Americans or outsiders, and the locals give you this friendly smile, but there's this whole really, really deeply seated prejudiced. I mean, grab any local from anywhere, and it won't be hard to get them to start criticizing. If it's not among themselves, they'll just make fun of and laugh at, or hate on people. Or even the nicest people, you will find that there's this prevailing prejudice against whites, basically, and nobody wants to talk about it in Hawaii because especially Europeans or Americans, they go to Hawaii wanting to create this idyllic paradise life, and as soon as they see that, because it's very different when you visit Hawaii, you can easily have an invisible shield that doesn't. You're looking to have a nice vacation and you don't see that. All you see are Hawaiians smiling and putting leis on you. Although if you're perceptive and sensitive, you may catch it, you may notice it, and not until you go live there do you feel. So in any case, I was doing little works on the street. When they bulldozed and reopened the lava road because they needed to get traffic to go through that part of Kalapana, which was practically a national park and a wavy, crumbled up little road that took you to some of the surviving subdivisions from the previous lava flow, now had to be reopened. And the bulldozer came down because another highway to Hilo was it seemed like it was about to be covered over by a lava flow, so they had to open this exit route along the coast, which meant you had to go all the way down to the coast and go around, I don't know how many dozens of extra miles, in case you needed to get out of Bahia, because the main road was about to get covered over. So anyways, pretty much a couple months as soon as I moved to this area, this happened. And when the bulldozers left, they left... they just basically plowed a straight line over this little windy thing that went over the Ahoy, and then people would negotiate and go really slowly and trickle, around and stuff. But when they did this straight bulldozed road, they didn't care about the edges, and so you'd have some cracks would have been left alongside the edge of this newly bulldozed road. And I had so much free time, and I went to architecture school, and I love landscaping and all this stuff, and I kind of did one of my little Italian street ventures where I started grabbing big boulders, and I started, at a large scale, from like, I don't know, maybe 150 meters from my house, up to, because by the time it got to my house, it went into an area that there were no more bare cracks left. So it was pretty much from my house to the beginning, to the entrance, what we call the barricade, that these conditions were left alongside the road. So I went and made like a trim, and I had to pick up big rocks so that they would be seen, and cars could see where at night there's no traffic lights, there's no street lights or lamps or anything there. So I thought I was doing something really good. And one of the problems I started having with locals is that they absolutely hated seeing that I took it upon myself to put these rocks along the side of the road, right? And so this whole subject of what's going on with Hawaiians, why do they have so much resentment and hate towards somebody that acts, if anything, a bit like a smart mouth, but I'm basically friendly and talkative and always want to be friends. And they were selling me pot too. It wasn't like they hated me, or no, they were acting like they liked me and they were my friends. It was all phony. But anyways, but occasionally, amidst this, what I thought was a stable situation, they would, like in the middle of the night, because they don't see them together, but then they socialize and they talk about the local, that the haole, the white person or the American or whatever, that they hate. And so they kind of, you become a character, especially if you lived alone like I did, but you live alone like I did then. You become a character that they can pick on in their own time, right? And so you notice that when you see different groups and how they look at you, there might be a little bit of paranoia, but not really, because I saw, like, they would do things where they would do wheelies on the road, which was a good, 100 yards or something, 60 meters from my shack, and I could barely see the road through the trees. But they knew that that if they did wheelies and laughed out loud and then aimed the car at me and flashed the highlights, they would be intimidating me. And so this kind of thing went on for 2-3 years. But there was always this boundary that they respected until that day they beat me up for basically coming outside and wanting to know what they were using the power chainsaw to. There's this buffer area, a strip of land that can be maintained and kept up by the property owner, but is also public. And so there's a sort of boundary area that if you're the public and you see that a property owner takes care of that strip, there's kind of an unspoken ethical rule that you would respect that. It wasn't the case on my property, but there were these big, huge albizzias. They saw that I took care of my garden. I was always out there on the street doing little things, planting trees and stuff. So they came with the chainsaws, and I came out trying to be as friendly as possible. I didn't have one of these like old geezer, arrogant, "What are you doing? You know, get out of my property." No attitude, not at all. And I think they were high on meth. I'm just kind of intelligently guessing, knowing what it's like over there. And as soon as I opened my mouth, they decked me. But anyway, this is not what I wanted to talk about. I never understood my synthesis of. I had several experiences. One was I was washing my clothes at the public spigot, and a lot of people did that, or even bathed under the water spigot. And so there's this whole thing that some locals hate it, that people really what it is that they look for reasons to rag on whites, you know, and because there were local ladies that would take their dishes there, and of course nobody said anything to them ever. No local said anything to them, but I I don't subscribe to these kinds of things that I'm noticing or I understand even, and I just want to be happy, or I feel my philosophy is that if you demonstrate you're not going by these set kind of subconscious rules of prejudice, and you act the opposite, you're forthcoming and you're talkative and ask them questions, share stuff, you know, trust them for, you know, I know hitchhikers that wouldn't stick their thumb out for locals, you know, but I never wanted to live that. I just wanted to see it as, so that's why it seemed even more heartbreaking that this hate that I would always get, and then the owners at the store. Okay, I don't want to make this too long. The owners at the local store also, they, you know, basically you just give them a few reasons, and if you're alone, if you're a guy that acts confidently happy to be living in Hawaii, and sort of run around with your dog or hitchhiking and stuff, and you kind of stand out this way, and you don't have sort of a low-key, quiet, sort of hippie, laid-back demeanor that can easily sort of, you know, blow by, you know, unasking of their reciprocity. That's what it is. You know, because when you're friendly and outgoing and extroverted, you're kind of asking the person to also be nice. Now, in most happy civil societies, they like that. That's how they live. Everybody is that way. But in Hawaii, if you are a little too forthgoing and unless you conform to one of the formats that they conform to, maybe some kind of neighborhood group, and with some people that have already accepted you, and you see where there are pockets of people where you see where whites and Hawaiians mix, but it's very careful. It's very meticulous. These things can actually be constructed. You can't just come out of nowhere and decide you're going to be a friendly citizen with everybody and not make a difference between Californians, whites, or what have you, and Hawaiians, because you will start noticing, wait, what did I do to them? You know, why is he talking? Why is he giving me that look? Why does he come up to, are you talking to me? Wait, am I talking to you? You know, like kind of like, where did that come from? And so when these experiences happen, I mean, it got really bad. These people, there was this one person who wanted to, you know, they barred you from going to the market, and there was a little way of putting their thumb on you. So you no longer can come to the market, and they had a list of people that they just didn't like you, and they vented they concentrate on people they could vent their hate on. And it has to do a lot with allowing. This is what I've noticed, that here in Italy, I'm going to tell you the experience I just had in Italy. This is going to a very simple conclusion about race, what it's really about. But I don't want to give it away right away, so I want to set up the situation. So what thing I noticed, and I noticed early on Kauai, because I was so in love and ecstatic about being on when I first moved to Hawaii, and I couldn't believe this living postcard I was living in. I was practically crying, every time I looked out the window, and the little Kauai has a little commuter bus that goes around the island, and I was just looking out the window. I can't believe, like, this is a community bus. I'm going to do errands in town, and there's waterfalls and rainbows, and so I would get off the bus, and all of a sudden I see a gardener, a local guy that was working hard under the sun, and he turned to look at me, and he gave me this loathing look, like, but the kind of look that you say, I did something to this person, or he thinks I'm somebody else. Um, but it wasn't. He didn't. He just continued to look at me with hate, looking at me with hate. Then he turned and made some kind of like tist, and continued working. I wasn't laughing. I didn't come out laughing like a maniac from off the bus. I just kind of came out really smiling and happy looking all around. And so I started developing this idea when these guys beat me up in Kalapana whatever, how many years later after Kauai, and all the other experiences. I started drawing these conclusions, these phrases that kind of describe a deeper understanding of what is happening, which we all try to do when we try to understand social problems. And was it basically they don't like seeing you happy? And what does that have to do with? Well, it has to do with they don't feel you have the right to be happy on their land, because they're all like engrossed in this thing that their islands, their once nation was robbed by the United States. 100 years later, what do we have to do with it? So it's a very peculiar situation, because this idea, this anti-American sentiment, sort of appeared more, became popularized, and people that moved to Hawaii were recruited into this popularized notion of America having stolen the islands from Hawaii, and even if you are, yeah, man, I'm just a visitor, dude, this is your place, and I respect it, I respect your culture, and this little song and dance number that a lot of people start doing once they go live there, you'll still not get spared. You still won't be spared from this hate that they have for you, and it's really the ugliest thing. But anyways, I left it at that. After I left, I just feel it's really sad and ironic in so many ways, because there are people that love Hawaii, and they love locals. They want to learn hula. They want, they have nothing against them. They don't come with any prejudice against Hawaiians, and that's it's not like other parts of the country or the world where there's two things that have been going on for a long time. No, whites come to Hawaii and they come clean. They're a clean slate, and all of a sudden they're hit with this that nobody's supposed to talk about. So they adapt and they become inward, and they just kind of smile all the time. And Hawaiians kind of enjoy this state of keeping the white population intimidated, like looking at them with a dirty look, and when the white person says, yes, I know, I'm just friendly, I'm not asking, I'm not saying anything, I'm not too happy, I'm just standing here, they kind of go, okay, good, you know your place then, and that's how this situation, this unspoken dirty little secret that is the truth about the social situation in Hawaii, it goes on and has been going on. Anyways, so here in Italy, when I moved here, and I was so depressed that I was locked up in a little space without hardly any windows and no green, and the streets and the town was kind of abandoned. They don't care really if things break down, or, crumbling and stuff. And so I wanted to beautify the street a bit for myself, I would say, to feel it's part of that personality that wants to feel. I'm actively creating my environment. I make myself a little happier by, as you can see, I get creative with my room and stuff. And so I was doing that on the street. And, most people, the normal people, would say, oh, wow, yeah, this happened to me in Hawaii too. I mean, when people saw those rocks, some people that live somewhere far away or what have you, white people that have been localized, either born on the islands or especially in particular, would say, "Good for you, bro." But it was only one out of, I don't know, 20 cars that would look at me like, "What's he doing? What does he think he's doing?" You know. Um, and here, something similar happened. I would get the people that would visit Orte would kind of smile and go, "Oh, it looks so good." Or some of my neighbors, people with, I hate to say it this way, but people with a little more social education, who are more civil and respectful. Like I have an architect neighbor, and and some other people, they really liked what I was doing, and um, by putting plants on the street. But I had problems though with people like my neighbors in this same building. People have idiosyncrasies in Italy, people that don't like plants, pots. I mean, you see them in every village. They have pots up and down the street because eventually the people that want to beautify the town prevail, and they put pots and they water, and you see them all over. But there's like a group of people that they're grumpy and they don't like to see pots. I don't know. It's a weird thing. It's very idiosyncratic. And that just so happens that my neighbor upstairs in this building was like that. And then she made a whole thing about, if you had asked first, okay, so we kind of, settled our thing, and now they're okay. I mean, you should see the front of this building. It's full of ivies and plants. It looks nothing like when I moved in. And when I did the thing across the street, let me get to the point here. I asked permission, as I always do, because even though it's public property, technically you're not supposed to put anything on public property, but that means there would be no pots anywhere and on any street. In Italy, you see them up and down every street. So it's kind of like one of those laws that are not observed because people want to see their streets look nicer. And so there's a whole personal situation. That's why these situations can teach you a lot, because it ends up being sort of not anarchical, but a situation where people engage each other with their feelings and their personal attempts or ideas of when they have authority, or what they have the right to say to you, or how to treat you, and this sort of thing. And so I asked permission to the people across the street if I could do something on a wall that was out of the way, and they said, "Well, I don't want it to touch the building." They have pots there, but the ones I was putting were not welcome. And so I said, "Okay, is this distance okay?" And they said, "Okay, fine." And so I made this whole little mini jungle, and I put an olive tree also in a pot, and some other plants. Well, anyways, a few months ago, they started redoing the facade, replastering the furthest building across the street, one building over towards a corner at the end of the street, at the entrance of town. You can see it from here. Actually, you can hear it right now. And so they did that really quickly. They put up the scaffolding, and the guy across the street told me, "Okay, now you're going to have to move these plants because they're going to do our building directly across from me." And so you got to move all this stuff. And so my way of looking at situations is always analyzing what people really always meant all along underneath. I'm always looking at the psychology of the situation. And I realized the guy kind of negotiated, but really his wish was for me not to put any pots anywhere in front of his house, even if it's not his property. It is technically the city's property. But we wanted, 2 years went by, and these plants got enormous. They're growing. They grew, and you can't see the pots anymore. It's like a big ball of grass, of plants, just succulents, and so he kept saying to me, "Well, they're about to do it. They're just going to move the scaffolding over to this other building. So you got to move this stuff." And I'm like, "Where am I going to put it? Where should I put it?" I try to be totally work together, because that's my idea, taught to me by wherever I lived. That you have to work things out communally with mutual respect. And so I try to engage people. Not I don't want them to do the work. I'll do it, but don't be mean. Let's talk about it. Tell me where I can put it so I can put it out of the way. I don't know. Just get it out of here, whatever. So I always get that now by these people that there is like the Italians. They say hi to you every day, and but really it's me who says good morning all the time. If I was somebody who never said good morning to anybody walking down the street, nobody would say good morning to me. It seems I'm the one that puts that first foot forward. And I've always wondered, what is it about me? Because I'm not really a mean, aggressive guy. I think if I was sort of like this burly, aggressive guy, people would try to win me over and be friendlier towards me. But because I have this penetrable personality, which is maybe a little self-assured, a little too, I don't know. I can see how sometimes it seems like I'm trying to gauge people too much, but it's certainly not mean or rude or anything like that. And so some people are friendly to me and like me for this reason, but other Italians, and I guess maybe they're just this way with everybody, I bother them a little bit. I couldn't tell why. There's this one guy in particular, right down the block from me, there's a monument to fallen soldiers, World War I monument, that's standing there like a big obelisk at the entrance of town. And it's got a little iron gate around it, a little iron fence. And behind it inside, there's gravel. And on the side of the street where all the cars come down in front of my house and leave town, along the side of the street of this rail and this little piece of a patch of gravel and grass around the monument, there's a border about, I don't know, maybe 12 inches of marble before the asphalt starts, right? So there's like a little lip. And I thought, well, okay, I told the guy across the street that was being really rude about me moving the plants. When these guys, because they stopped doing what they were doing in the corner building, and they paused a little bit, and so they were supposed to come back to take it all down and use that same scaffolding to put it up on the building across from me, his building. And I said to him, when they come back, I'll then, negotiate, because I want to ask him, what, where they needed to be clear, so I'll ask them to tell me, to help me figure out how I'm going to move the pots. And so he was still mean. He was saying, we're going to need all this space. You can't put it anywhere around here. Okay, so I started looking across the street at this little lip along the guardrail on the monument. I could line all the pots up on that ledge. And it's off the asphalt, and it's like the only place basically around here that I can carry the pots to that is not, that somebody won't say anything. It's in front of my house, or you can't, there's no room here, there's no green, there's no space for anything. So you really got to find places that will be out of the way of where everybody's own little requirements or whatever they feel is aesthetically not where they want to see it. And so I get woken up this morning by the sound of the scaffolding, and I know that the guys are here, so I rush down and I start moving one at a time across the street to this little lip by the monument. And so I also wanted it there because I also thought it was a good place, because meanwhile I can continue to water the plants and they don't dry up in summer. And there's this guy called Nazareno, which he's like this hysterical, wannabe, positive, but kind of bossy at the same time guy who thinks he's like the owner of the town. He talks to you like this, a very typical Italian manner, I kind of, imagine somebody with putting their arms on their waist like that and saying, well, we're going to do this, and you're doing that, no, you get up, do this, do that, very bossy, very loud. But at the same time, it's a manner that I know how to engage. You just match it, and you can have a conversation, or as he has conversations with everybody, and he has his clique of friends, and they like this kind of posturing when they talk, um, acting like all their decisions are important. Um, and he walks past me. Oh, and he also cuts the grass behind the rail, inside the space around the monument. And there's a pot in front of the monument, a round pot, a huge big pot, flat, low and big and round, that is directly in front of the monument, which splits the entrance to the town in the street that goes up and the street that comes down. And so he waters that. And he sees me every day. We take care of pots and plants. And, I sweep. I'm the only one I've ever seen sweep the street. And I also took care of that pot. But he also thinks that pot is his. And so he doesn't say anything to me, like pruning it. And then he will go over what I did and change it, or like he has no regard for collaboration, or doesn't care what I do. He'll maybe, whatever. So he's really rude, in other words. And he walked by and saw me put all the pots along the side, and gave me his typical point at me as he's walking past, pointing at the vases as he's walking past really fast. No, those can't be there. You got to get them out of there. And when I hear this typical statement, you got to get them out of there, it's like a stone being thrown at a creative person's heart, because a creative person, whether you're painting a mural and the neighbors agreed to let you paint somewhere. Of course, it wasn't the entire population of the town that gave you permission to paint that mural there. So when somebody goes by that even didn't know that a mural was going to go out there, is like they may decide, who the hell gave you permission to put that ugly thing up there? You can imagine the person painting the mural, how hurt he might feel, especially if he did everything according to a certain kind of understanding protocol of respect and community participation, which is kind of a parallel thing to people that decide to beautify a street on their own. They kind of let themselves be seen, they bounce it off. If most people don't say anything, it means they like it. If they get good comments and compliments, it means he's doing a good thing. And then an asshole like this comes and says to you, get that out. I don't care where you put it. Get it out of there. So I learned to deal with this guy. And then we start shouting, because I got this weird side, and I don't know, I got brain damage or something, but when somebody hits a certain key, it didn't happen with the Hawaiians, because I knew that if I escalated with Hawaiians verbally, what they're looking for is for an excuse to gang up and beat you up, which they did eventually, and they were about to a few times. But in a place like Italy, there are shouting matches of people that argue on occasion. It's that's how it goes down here, and so that little part of my brain just decided to let him know what I felt, and I says, you only talk to me with that disrespect. I wasn't calmly saying it. We were shouting it to each other as he's walking away. Because if I were one of your friends, you would be okay. You would just laugh it off and not really care. But because it's me, you allow yourself to treat me that way. I was really wounded, and the same thing happened to me with my neighbor in the building a couple of years ago with there's these explosions in which all of a sudden everything I understand is the reason behind they allow themselves. Because this is the ironic part. I'm getting to what this video is about. you know, I often get, at least in Italy, it's been this way. It's not this way in Argentina. In Argentina, I seem to be more like everybody else there. However, social interactions and what I'm going to say later will also explain this why. In the States, the same thing, and it will also be explained. Um, but in Italy and Hawaii, I'm an outsider, right? In Italy, I speak with a Spanish accent, and they know I'm American, which makes me even more, odd to them. I don't have a comprehensive, I'm not integrated into the town with friends and stuff. I'm basically a loner, and they're very unfriendly here. It's not my problem. Everybody says it about most towns, most small towns in Italy, actually. Everybody complains about their own people in town, um, being jerks and what have you. But to me, what was really unnerving is that even though I'm always trying to be civil and friendly and communicative and involving of others and making others, not treat people like they don't matter, but in the context of community respectfulness, not because I'm trying to make friends or anything. Yeah, if they want to be my friends, great. So it's sort of a multi-purpose kind of attitude. But in reality, I just do it so that everybody lives happily, and I feel that everybody should be that way. And like I said before, in most Western places, Italians are like that in their own terms with one another. And I'm working my way to what I'm going to talk about. But what really unnerved me is that even though nobody says hi to me first or seems to, I can tell, even if they see me as odd or weird or not from somewhere else, and the outsider. Let's say that this happens everywhere in the world. It's no big deal. They still, the fact that I open the door and say, you can talk to me and I'm not going to bite, I'm somebody friendly, allows them in situations like this to, unleash a barrage of authoritative mistreatment at you. Like I was a child, which is what happened to me with a lady, in the building, and what just happened to me with Nazarenos. Like all of a sudden he's shouting at me like I'm a toddler that you have to reprimand. And I'm like, where do they get this confidence from? I mean, I'm not his family. Well, he should respect me like any other person in town. I'm an adult. I'm past, I'm ending middle age pretty soon. What, is he crazy? This is what's going on in my analysis, of course, and as I'm thinking about it in hindsight, every time I notice these things, it's like, wow, why do people allow themselves to mistreat you when, if they didn't know you, you were really a stranger, or you were somebody that never talked to anybody, never said hello, they wouldn't allow themselves to unleash that rudeness on you. But because you're friendly, they do. And that always irked me. I always felt it was unfair. But what it made me realize is that, because then I think about racism in the United States and what allows people to feel entitled to have ideas about other groups. And what I realized is that it has to do with subconsciously associating the idea of that person to not being the owner of the house, in a sense, not belonging, you could say. Now, in the case of African Americans, it's like we know logically they're just as Americans, right? But because physically we have had the history that we did, and then the continued proliferation of ideas of social class and crime and what have you associated to the race, uh, we continue to see them subconsciously as distinct or apart or a different group. In America, we have solved this by taking groups and saying, respect them, treat them well. Who? The group, that group, but treat them well. So we define more strongly the group, and then we create a social logic in which we have to give equal rights to all these groups and respect them and so forth. But kind of never goes away, is what I noticed in the United States. It keeps resurfacing in ways that are maybe more subtle, but it's like it never really goes away. And I just wrote to somebody in one of my Facebook groups about something they did in Rwanda, which is they passed laws because of the hate there was between Tutsis and Hutus. They passed laws to no longer employ terminology, the labels of Hutus, ethnic reference to these names. I don't know exactly the details of the law, but basically it said, treat each other, you're all Ugandans. So I'm imagining, I haven't read the specifications of this law, but I imagine it's about not calling a store the Hutu, Hutu souvenirs, or the Tutsi whatever a restaurant. I think that is illegal, and I think because of its law, it's got to be something hard, right? It can't just be a suggestion to people, but then comes the suggestion to people through those hard laws, and with the idea that everybody's Rwandan first. And God, I've been trying to say this in the States. I mean, in groups regarding racism for a long time. It's like all it has to do is continue to perpetuate through thinking in racial terms. If we just stop, I mean, really, to talk about anything that concerns human behavior, human people, human condition, there never is any need to resort to calling somebody by their ethnic or racial group. It's kind of convenient for the mind, and that's why it doesn't disappear completely when you have to describe somebody or talk about an area of town, where all the Jews live, for example. But in the manner that we reason and think about social issues, it's really not necessary. It doesn't make it more or less of an issue in any of its qualities because it is any of those groups, because we're talking about human matters. And so in the States, we should have the same understanding. And it occurred to me, if early on, after slavery, when slavery was done with, or when we had the resurgence of the problem in the 50s and what have you, there had been a strong leader or strong laws that simply said it clear that from now on, everybody, basically, this is the idea, not worded this way, of course, but from now on, let's say right after slavery, this kind of thinking has been installed in the wording of law. From now on, all Africans are just as American, with the same and equal right to this land as everybody else. They are now Americans. They are now as if they had been the ones to arrive on Plymouth Rock. If that idea had been clearly established, instead of continuing to identify a group to be treated a certain way, they now have rights but immediately made it understood that this is their home now. This is their country. I think we never would have had all the problems that came later in the 50s and still going on. In all the many ways it broke down into other problems, and the same for all groups. Because what I realized is that Nazareno treated me that way, and the guy across the street about my pots, the police did come by the way. Apparently he picked up the phone right away and he saw I was moving the pots, and then he said something to the construction workers, and I heard the construction workers say to him really quickly, "No, they did tell him. They did tell him. They can't. So by law, they can't be there. But everybody understands that this is a temporary situation. He didn't have to be an asshole." And the reason Nazareno and the guy across the street treat me the way, because subconsciously, even though my last name is Italian and what have you, and they can tell that I've lived here for however many years, they subconsciously see me as somebody that doesn't quite belong in the country. Not for any logical reason, but just because that's the subconscious conclusion the mind makes, and detracts or constructs subconsciously from the fact of the more visual and obvious from the more visual and obvious facts that they notice, like that I came from either Argentina or the United States, or that I speak with a Spanish accent, and that I'm weird and whatever, that walk around with my dog putting pots on the street, and or always come up with unusual comments. And my way of speaking, my language, it doesn't format into the typical comment, the small talk that Italians repetitively say with one another. Like everything, it's the same kind of comment, and then the same kind of comment to a story that you tell. If you do that, you get that, and whatever. It's the same kind of language and wordage. It's like rehearsed scripts that it happens everywhere. We have in all countries cultural small talk. Consists of a certain formatted, already pre-formatted, repeated responses and comments, observations, and the banal, right? And so my is not the same, and so that's immediately they see me as somebody who's not Italian. And so that's basically all that's fueling, making that the guy across the street in Nazareno allow themselves to treat me this way. And so it's the answer to a problem that maybe we're making too big of a deal, but we basically need to have the courage to say, especially to everybody else, these people. It's like we've now done this. We've now given the country to. It's funny because in immigration, people are complaining about that. It's like we're giving it away, but we're letting them have everything we got, and they could just come here and claim Social Security and have a job, and so people who are anti-open, free, unregulated immigration. Have this complaint, but in the subconscious understanding of the social situation, these people are going to be victims of the same racism, because we don't see them, we don't think them, we don't understand them as all of a sudden getting incorporated into the single population that defines the culture, the integral culture of the country. So laws and ways of talking about problems need to aim for that in ways that are not necessarily too obvious, because if you just say it, maybe it sounds right, but it doesn't do the job. And so it's not the easiest situation. I mean, how absurd would it sound, would it seem that now, or would it sound to say now, starting tomorrow, America is, African Americans. This is the country of African Americans. This is their country. We say it, but it seems to be not contextualized to the heart of our prejudice, the essence from where our prejudice subconsciously dwells. So it's not an easy thing. But so first, I think we need to understand how we misordered education to not really deal with the subconscious assumptions that we make, simply because we're reinforcing it by maintaining a distinct separate group. And so, as long as we continue to say African Americans as a group different to Hispanics, different to Japanese people, there's always going to be a part of our brain that will say, well, the ones that came later, or it's not quite their home. They came to this place. And that is because it is just that fundamental to the sense of our existential sense, psychologically and subconsciously, the idea of home, the idea of what your belonging, your sovereign belonging that is the country of a people, is so deep in the subconsciously, fundamentally important that in order for new people to go in there, it is a complex bunch of different. All you got to do is think of the people that we have come to see that way, and we think of as Americans, as ourselves. And who do we notice? We notice people of other descendants of other countries that have been in the country for several generations, whose last name or whose ethnic background already makes reference to a lot of parts of the country's history. And so eventually, and that's kind of where Americans of African descent, I prefer to say it that way, Americans of African descendants are there, have a lot of that, have a lot of the ingredients already for them to no longer be seen as a different group, already as American as any American. But because we continue to identify groups in the country, it also fosters and fuels the notion of who are then. It's not an educated or constructed reasoning. It's because our subconscious mind is always identifying all of us whose home this is. And so when we create other groups, we provoke also the question, whose home is it then, if these groups exist that are in movement or need to be equal or incorporated? Whose home is it? Because the idea of home already is permanently existing in the subconscious. The sovereign existence of one's belonging in a territory or a home, a piece of land, a place, is always the starting point. So if we create other groups and say those groups are also part of this home, we're also provoking the thought of, well, who's the group whose home it is originally, and naturally, in other words. That's kind of what the mind is always wanting to affirm. Whose is the natural sovereign of this land, of this home? And so the Tutsis and the Hutus are addressing it. They're saying, well, we're not going to give this society or any more tools or instruments by which to help that weakness or that predisposition of always confirming or responding to doubts about who the belonging sovereign people of that country are. We're not going to continue feeding that instability, that reason to question it by creating groups. As far as my situation with Italians here, I don't think it's ever going to change, because Italians are so, like, never get them to change anything. And so, I talk differently and what have you. But that doesn't mean one can't be happy or can't, make a whole bunch of friends and fulfill fill your life with happiness and people that are beautiful and bring love to it. But it's. I think we need to really get to the essence of situation. There are places where it is unnecessary that we continue to have these problems with people that already are of that nationality. Um, you know, in places like Hawaii, white people that are born in Hawaii really need to fit in a format that tells Hawaiians these are Hawaiians that are generations already born on the islands, and it's through the way they talk, through their demeanor, the pauses, the how to engage and talk to one another with a certain kind of distance and rhythm, slower rhythm to. Um, there's a different way of talking that sounds less um, more contained, more retracted, more respectful of whatever word is said uh, before you encroach it with your own discourse. You kind of sort of have to listen more, and it's a manner of speech that perhaps if I had been better at understanding right away, I wouldn't have had problems with Hawaiians. If I would have just been quiet and said yes, okay, all right, see you, bye, which some new arrivals learn to do immediately. Then they tell me that I'm the one that has problems. It's not them who are hostile and violent and aggressive. It's me who I don't know how to. And it's because they've already adapted themselves to become the required persona. But still, it's injustice occurs because there are people who, just the way you speak should not be a reason to mistreat you. But that's basically what it comes down to in Hawaii. And the truth is that Hawaii has been American for 100 years. And this is a very difficult thing to talk about. But if you want to solve a political situation that's 100 years old, it really is about the instrument of government and the people that work in government, and not at all about any of the people that live on the islands, because their grandparents weren't even around when, or their parents weren't even around when this happened. And it really speaks of a little bit of cowardice and laziness on part of some of these locals' mentalities, because they like to put on a big show about how their rights and their native culture and blah blah are being trampled, and then they tie that into sort of bullying or intimidating people that are too white or too outsiders. But they don't go to the people in Honolulu who are directly connected to Washington, who are running the state, that have the authority and all the institutions that run what was their nation. They don't say anything to them. They take it out on the poor hippie in Kalapana, and they beat him up. And then they don't really, they're not proactive. There's some groups, but they don't, somehow they don't engage. The only people 100 years later that they should be angry at is their own people in government, who are doing the work of Washington in maintaining the military bases and all the country supposedly unlawfully annexed to the United States. They're the ones that are tightening those, but they don't talk to them. They take it out on the people. And here is why: because subconsciously they're not thinking logically. They're responding to the differentiations and distinctions and discernments that they see, and that provokes them to be racist and prejudiced and hateful towards and create a racist problem in Hawaii. And it all has to do with not feeling the notion of a whole people living in their home together. They certainly fight that. They certainly don't want you to be there, but anyways. So yeah, understanding the spirit behind the problem of racism and prejudices has to do with a very, very subconscious need for all of us to feel at peace with the people rightfully and sovereignly being part of our home as much as one is. And anything that starts standing out away from that single group, heterogeneously thought of people belonging to your home, and whatever description of that heterogeneity is, will allow some people, not everybody, but will allow some people to see it as an excuse to push them out, to make them feel that they don't belong, to mistreat them, to be violent, to hate them, to talk about them, to whoever, it depends who it is. But that's where it all comes from. Okay, so that's my video. Hope you enjoyed it and that it was useful. Aloha, ciao, hasta luego, un beso a todos, see you later, see you soon, bye.